Welcome to Fiery Discourse, your podcast or media featuring dragonesses, female dinosaurs, and other similar saurians and scalies. I'm your host, Ludmillanon, and with me are my co-hosts, Angron, Mathmachine and The Shark. Today is our 183rd episode, and we're discussing 1997 Star Trek Voyager episode, Distant Origin. So, let's get things started.
Space, the final frontier. These are the episodes of the Fiery Discourse. It's never-ending mission to explore strange new dragonesses, to seek out and discover new lizards and dragon waifus, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before.
I knew someone was going to do something like that, but man, that was way funnier than I expected with the Shatner. Star Trek Voyager was the 5th Star Trek series to be made, and was the first of the female captain, Captain Janeway. Janeway is played by Kate Mulgrew, who played Mrs. Columbo previously, and also was Zira in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, making her the second Star Trek alumni to voice an evil, orange-scaled reptilian female from outer space. First one being Cosma. The Star Trek Voyager is about the titular Voyager going through a time warp and getting trapped on the other side of the galaxy, trying to find its way home. I've been really trying to find a way to talk about Star Trek on the podcast for a very long time, and I'm glad this is the one we could talk about. The episode we're talking about actually comes from season 3 of the show, and it begins not on the Voyager or in outer space at all. The episode begins with the shot of a volcano erupting, then panning over to a cave. Two figures investigate the ruins of things they find in the cave, as it is revealed they are both seemingly lizard people, which is why we are covering this episode. The design is pretty interesting in that it's humanoid, with them covered in scales and brow ridges, with very clawed reptilian hands, but their heads are still humanoid enough. It's not just like they're just a dinosaur standing upright. They actually took the time to think, what would a dinosaur look like when it was evolved?
Yeah, I like this little subversion here, where it's not the people uncovering some ancient creature, but it's the creatures themselves uncovering the people. And by the looks of things, this looks like it was someone from either a previous series or a previous season. Is definitely a little bit of interesting connectivity in this series. I may not be the biggest fan, but I can appreciate intelligent moments like this when they happen.
My first thought during this moment was something like, oh, they're on Bryo from Metroid Prime 3, because in that game it's also a lava planet that you enter and it kind of looks like a lava planet, but then you discover like ruins and history of the lizard people that used to live there as well. So it's kind of made me think of that.
The two lizard men find a piece of gold uniform cloth as well as a bone. Go ahead, Matt.
So to explain things a little bit, this planet is Hanon 4, which was used in the season 2 finale / season 3 opener basics. It was where a bunch of the Voyager crew were dumped off after their ship got taken. This is a primitive planet, and it is, as we're about to see, where one of the crew members died. So it's a nice little interconnectivity that we're seeing a planet back from earlier in the season brought back for plot relevance reasons. And it's not just, oh, crewman died and that's it.
I did not know that, and I give the writers all the credit for actually doing that, because it actually gives it a lot more poignancy than it otherwise would have. One of the lizard men calls the other one over with clicking, which turns out to be their language. The first lizard man asks if there's a genetic match, as the other one says that there is, and they will bring it to the ship. The first one asks if it really is the proof that they need, as the second says that if it is, we've made the most important discovery in Vault history, as we pan down to see a human skull. Obviously, they found this skull near an old ladyfish selling ice cream, and one of the scientists is going to say, "Make mine a chocolate!" We then get the opening sequence with the USS Voyager flying past various planets in outer space before it warp drives out of there. The music that they play in this opening is really good. I mean, it's no original series or Next Generation, but actually I like it just a little bit better than Deep Space Nine, to be honest. And the CGI is really impressive for the time period. Star Trek always had pretty good effects, with the exception of the original series because they had a much tighter budget. But interestingly enough, they do not do the space, the final frontier speech. And it's one of those things I always misremembered. I always remembered Janeway giving a variation of the space, the final frontier speech, but it just isn't there. And I don't know, it feels kind of weird they don't have that, you know? It's like the hallmark of Star Trek. It'd be like opening a James Bond movie without the gun barrel. It just feels a little weird.
I understand not liking that because of that reason, and I've never argued against anyone that says that. I personally really do like this opening because it has this concept of letting the visuals and the wonder and majesty of space accompanied with this orchestral music speak for itself. And I think that it does an excellent job of conveying what a Star Trek series is about. Exploration, this beauty of the universe as a whole, the imagination that they can create from so many different things and so many far-flung worlds. That kind of idea.
I gotta agree. Like, even for series that pretty much spoof Star Trek, like Lower Decks, it doesn't do that whole thing intentionally for a reason, and to like get off the overall vibe of the series you're going into. For this one, you're going in expecting it to be just another Star Trek series, but nope, it's a more comical take on things, and it's as apparent as the opening, which gives us everything we need to know about what we're about to experience. Same here with this.
Like I say, it really is just so impressive that how they kept topping themselves with each series until they very much did not, but that's for a future time. After the opening credits, we cut to the two aliens going through their findings, putting the human skeleton back together in the best way they can. They note how the creature has opposable thumbs, but a smaller cranial capacity, 22% smaller than ours, and how they don't have the same type of lobe. The aliens also wonder, due to its weird nose, if it had no sense of smell. This to me is just so clever, how it's dinosaur aliens making assumptions about humans by incomplete fossils, turning the whole thing on its head. I always like when shows do that kind of deal.
Yeah, I was gonna comment on that. That was an interesting topic. How they see something that's mundane for us, but then they see it and it's like, oh, he has an extra bone here. It means he used it to hunt or something like that. And there's like some that they find the skeleton, but they clone it and how they perceive it, and it's more feral. Like there's a famous image where they show a skeleton that says, "Oh, this is how it looks. This is how aliens will rebuild it," and they show like a hunting monster, but this is how the animal really was, and it was a rabbit. And yeah, it's kind of interesting how they show that part of what aliens will think of humans, basically.
Yep, that's something that Star Trek always did pretty good. They note how the creature was warm-blooded, and then realize that it is not a saurian. One of the scientists is shocked, realizing that it might hurt their case, as the first scientist, Gigan, says that their genetic makeup is the same, and, however distant, they share the same ancestor. They wonder what the alien was doing on this part of space, before the second scientist, Veer, wonders if it was part of an expedition with crew members. Holding up the tattered uniform, they note that it is made of polyester and they use some kind of replication technology. They note the Starfleet emblem and wonder if it was part of the uniform or some kind of military function. Gagan picks up the human skull and holds it up, obviously copying his favorite movie, Nightmare Before Christmas. He asks the skull if it once saw the world of their origin and if it was beautiful. He asks if they had sand or water and if they had 9 moons or 0, in a really well done monologue that...
As he is picking up the skull, this is Ensign Hogan, by the way. All I can imagine is Gagan saying, "Alas, poor Hogan, I knew him, Veer."
Honestly, I was more imagining the lines of, "Alas, poor Homo sapien, we hardly knew thee."
Veer stares at him bemusingly as Gagan says that the ship and the people on it is what they need to find in order to find out where the Voth come from. Veer says that he will contact the Circle of Archaeology for help, as Gagan says no, they need a sector-wide expedition with a fleet of ships. He says they must go to the Minister of Elders, as the other scientists are all afraid. Gagan notes that the fossil record shows their subject died a year ago, tying into what Matt said earlier about this being from the previous season, which, again, really clever callback there. Gagan tells Veer that he took an oath for the pursuit of scientific truth. He says that they will head to the city ship and, quote, "let our friend do the talking." We cut to a shuttlecraft heading towards the main ship, then to Gagan, where he tells the ministers about his theory, and how the remains proves his distant origin theory. The theory, which is the main concept of the episode, is about how the Voth evolved on a different planet and traveled far away there to the regions of space. Their leader, Minister Odala, notes that a mere pile of bones is not very impressive. Odala is the main reason we're talking about this episode because she is the main antagonist of this. She's played by Concetta Tomei, and she does a really good job playing this character. It almost reminded me a little bit of Kai Wynn from Deep Space Nine, who, interestingly enough, was also played by Louise Fletcher, aka Nurse Ratched.
Ooh.
They both have that same kind of religious fundamentalism to their character, and even though Odala is in one character compared to Kai Wynn, who was in an entire series, she still gives off such an amazing amount of depth, which is even more impressive when you consider the amount of prosthetics these actors have to work under. Gegan then tries to explain that the creature is from a species unknown to their region, but their genetic markers are so similar, they are related. He will prove that the Voth and the other beings evolved on the same homeworld.
I can honestly see it with this character, because both give off that whole holier than thou art sort of deal, while also being better than thou art as well, which may or may not impact her score greatly.
In case it wasn't clear, because Star Trek is so well known for being incredibly subtle, this is effectively the writers going, what if Galileo, but with space lizards?
It very much is like that, and also a bit like Charles Darwin, as we'll get to in a little bit. Odala appears to be curious about what Gegan is saying that it is like the distant origin theory. Gegan says that he has to go and find whatever these beings are, showing a mock-up of what they think a human being is, which is mostly accurate, but I do like this. Their version of humans have green-colored skin because, of course, they'd have no idea what actual skin color looked like. Kind of like us with dinosaurs. We have no idea what dinosaur scales really are. We're probably going more by educated guesses or something.
Heck, until quite recently, we didn't know they actually had feathers. We actually saw them scaly, but no, that's not the case.
Like I say, I love how they do that. They turn a little thing like that on its head. It's something that's so clever and a show like only Star Trek would really do. Gegan says that they are advanced as endotherms, as another minister is absolutely horrified at the thought that they are related to a mammalian species. So these guys would not do good in Zootopia, let's put it that way. Gegan asks for their permission, but Odala interrupts him, saying how he bribed his way to find the cave, and that the skeleton may be a complex hoax. Gegan says that he analyzed the skeleton thoroughly, and it is real. Odala considers the wider implication of his theory by challenging their doctrine means that everything about them with their past and their authority would be a complete and utter lie. Gegan says that they may have to reevaluate things, as Odala is disgusted at this. I do like that you can actually see her facade starting to break even now, but she still has enough control under the situation that she can regain her composure. She says how, "We will consider your request for an expedition," and instantly leaves.
Yeah, we sure she's not related to, per se, Dilophosaurus, particularly the Jurassic Park one, because it sounds like she's holding back her venom, or as much as she can, before it just spurts out.
Well, let's hope there aren't any descendants of Dennis Nedry on the Voyager then. Veer then congratulates Gegan, as Gegan angrily says how he failed to anticipate how ignorant the ministers would be. He tells Veer to collect their supporters and get their expedition running. We cut to Gegan's daughter, Flora, and she says how she is afraid of his theory and how the ministers reacted to it. Gegan says if enough people confront the ministry, things will change, as Flora says how she wants to believe, but much like Fox Mulder, she is confused over how this could even happen. Gegan is disappointed in her, as Flora says that he is chasing a fantasy and how he should stop. Gegan notes that if he doesn't stop, their race will continue to live in ignorance and they must find out the truth no matter what. Veer returns, saying how there are rumors that the ministers plan on arresting him on the charge of heresy. Gegan tells Veer to go and be with his family, as Veer says that he will be with Gegan no matter what. Gegan says how he has found the name of the ship on the uniform, revealing that it is none other than the USS Voyager. Dun dun dun! Except that we probably knew that because the show is Voyager, so no big surprise there.
They're shocked by the charge of heresy because nobody expects the Bothian Inquisition.
We cut to the research shuttle flying off as Gegan narrates, saying how they searched for weeks and found absolutely nothing, until a trader at a space station told them about a spaceship called Voyager. They then meet various merchants who tell them more about humans, including correcting what their appearance is, and giving them other objects like communicators and warp plasma from Voyager's engine. It turns out that they are scanning space for a matching signature, and they now know that these aliens are called humans. One thing to point out, we are already nearly 15 minutes into the Voyager episode, and none of the characters in Voyager or the Voyager ship itself has appeared, and yet the story is so well written and the characters are so fascinating. You don't even notice it. I actually only noticed it because I checked the time bar and I was surprised it took that long. It's a 40-minute episode that a quarter of it doesn't even have the titular ship or any of the main characters, but it doesn't matter. That just shows how good the writing is and the acting is on this show.
Fun fact, the space station that they are at and get the information from is from episode 13 of this same season, Fair Trade. And it even includes the race that they got the warp plasma from, which was a part of the episode itself. So once again, continuity matters. Stuff happens, and we are seeing effectively this race chart a very quick version of the path that Voyager themselves have been on.
That is so clever. I like when shows do callbacks like that, especially in this case.
I like how sometimes they take a break from the main race that ultimately is supposed to be focused on, who are like trying to understand the main characters.
Yeah, as you mentioned it, the story works really well without the main characters, because even though Star Trek, the whole thing is, the crew in the ship and the captain and all of that, the series is also like a story of their universe, and yeah, they honestly could have episodes where it's nothing but other species, other planets. It could work because they're clearly trying to build the whole galaxy rather than just focusing on specific characters.
And that's one thing that Star Trek always did so well, even again in original series, is just the world building is really just phenomenal. It turns out that, in a really neat touch, all this narration that Gegan has been giving is actually a recording that he plans on sending to his daughter as Veer arrives, with Gegan saying how he sent it to Flora. And that's so fascinating how they took a trope that you typically associate with Star Trek, the captain talking in their captain's log, recording the events of the episode, and they actually give this one a bit of a purpose behind it rather than just it being a recording, which is pretty clever. Veer asks if it's so wise to send the message out, as Gegan says he encrypted the message. Veer asks if he sent his regards, as Gegan notes how, "I've seen your skin tint around my daughter. I let you into my academic circle, but now you want to be in my family circle as well." Veer apologizes as Gegan says that his family only mates with another family, then sees an insect and eats it with his lizard tongue, which again is such good world building for characters that really are only going to appear in this one episode for the most part. It really is something that they didn't have to do, but the fact that they do makes it feel so much more realistic, and I am really impressed with it. As Veer jokes, traditions are meant to be broken, the two laugh together. A siren then goes off, and no, they are not going into the bottom of the trench where they find a giant sea monster that wants them to cook Krabby Patties. Instead, they see a ship 90 light years away, which turns out to be Voyager. They use a cloaking device to hide both their ship and their appearance as they slow down. Veer asks if they should talk to the humans, as Gegan says they will analyze their behavior to see who or what they are, as we cut to Voyager. Veer and Gegan notice a human walking past them, taking notes on what they look like. We then get a really funny exchange. "I didn't expect the smell." "What do you expect? They are mammals after all." The two then go towards the ship's computer and download the entire database so they can get more information on humans. Tom Paris and B'Elanna arrive as they playfully argue over Tom's abilities as the ship's engineer. Gegan and Veer note a male-to-female interaction. Let's observe, as we see the two Voyager crew members using a computer, as B'Elanna is forced to admit that Tom was right. Tom jokes since he was right. B'Elanna has to pay up with a date to the holodeck for him winning. Veer and Gegan take note of this courtship behavior and note how, since they don't have the ability to vasodilate, the humans have to resort to crude verbal interplay, which is funny because B'Elanna is a human-Klingon hybrid, so she's not really the kind of field data that they'd want in this case. As Tom leaves, he then tells her to BYOB, bring your own bathlet, as B'Elanna looks annoyed at this.
First of all, honestly, the whole human erection. Let's go. That's just us with any male and female dragon interaction. And second of all, while BYOB, bring your own batleth, is cute and all, it will never top the absolute perfection that is Lego Batman's ABR. Always be recording.
Makes you wonder if their culture has something like a podcast called Mammal Discourse.
Maybe.
Definitely be interesting to listen to that, that's for sure. We then cut to the bridge where Janeway arrives, demanding a status report. Chakotay tells her that in 2 days, they'll be entering a region with heavy radiation, and the alternative is a 2-month detour. Janeway tells Tuvok to raise the shields, and for Harry Kim to control the scan. She wants to know everything about the type of radiation before they decide to go in it. Veer and Guigan walk around the bridge, wondering if human society is a matriarchy because Janeway is the captain of the ship. Harry then notices 2 spatial fluctuations from the bridge, saying how whoever's doing it, they're using a cloaking device. Janeway calls out for an intruder alert as a siren goes off. Veer and Guigan try to leave, but are suddenly stopped by a force field. Tuvok placed the force field there as Kim spots the 2 life forms. Veer and Guigan manage to interface to another deck as Janeway calls out to them, only for Kim to tell her they are now in the mess hall. We cut to the mess hall where they ask Neelix, the comedy relief of the show, who most fans did not like for a pretty good reason because apparently he was really, really annoying in the first couple of seasons. They ask Neelix if there's any intruders as he says he doesn't see any. Veer and Guigan realize they have underestimated humans and they may have to make contact. We cut to the bridge where Harry analyzes where their variance is as Janeway contacts Chakotay in the turbo lift. She tells him to adjust their phasers to where their cloaking technology can be disrupted as Guigan and Veer prepare to leave the ship.
And the reason this guy didn't see the aliens in the mess hall is because he was too busy reading the tea leaves, the local newspaper from the Pillow Kingdom.
Chakotay and Tuvok enter in 2 different doors as they spot where the reptilians are. They fire on the aliens, revealing them as we hear the Voth language and what it sounds like to the humans. It's a series of clicks. Veer hits Chakotay with a dart, knocking him unconscious as Veer is hit by a phaser. However, before Guigan can get hit, he jumps on Chakotay and they both teleport away. We then cut to sickbay where the doctor, a hologram, is looking over Veer. Janeway approaches him about giving the alien a belated welcome on board, then demanding to know where her first officer is. Veer communicates to her in a series of clicks, as Janeway asks where his ship is and that they don't plan on hurting him. Veer then begins to close his eyes as the doctor notes that his metabolism is shutting down. Tuvok asks if he's dying as the doctor says no, he is just going into a hibernation state. Janeway asks if he could revive the alien, then they want to examine his weapons to, quote, see what we're up against. We cut back to the research ship where Chakotay wakes up on a bed. Guigan introduces himself as Chakotay tries to beam himself down, only for Guigan to tell him that there is a containment field around him. Chakotay asks why he invaded their ship, as Guigan says it wasn't an invasion and they meant no harm. Chakotay mentions the harpooning as Guigan notes that was a mistake. Veer panicked. Chakotay says that they kidnapped him, as Guigan says they have questions for him about the planet of his origins. Showing him a display of the Earth, Guigan asks if that's where his kind is from. Chakotay tells him to drop the force field and the 2 of them can finally make first contact in a civilized manner. Guigan does so as the 2 introduce each other, and Chakotay prepares to tell him about the Earth. We cut back to the Voyager as Janeway heads back into sickbay, where the doctor tells her about the genetic markers and shows her how their DNA strands are almost identical, to Janeway's shocked. Janeway notes that their species evolved on Earth, as the doctor jokes, and from the look of it, you and him are distant cousins. Janeway tells the doctor to go to the holodeck, as she says, it's time we take a stroll through primeval history. We cut to them in the holodeck as Janeway asks the computer to analyze the genetic markers and search Earth's fossil record to find any ancestors of humans and Voth alike. The computer makes a small hologram of an Earrops, as the doctor notes how it's the ancestor of both cold and warm-blooded creatures. Janeway asks the computer what the most highly evolved cold-blooded creature was, as it shows her a hadrosaur. Janeway theorizes that the hadrosaurs didn't all die off, and, quote, what if some of them survived extinction and continued to evolve? And it's at this moment I came to a horrible realization. This is the same plot of the 1993 Super Mario Bros. Movie. I hope we don't get to see Toad, the weird hippie singer. I can't stand seeing that guy twice.
Honestly, though, this just got me a mental image of seeing Ducky's whole hadrosaur-based race also evolved. Which, yeah, imagine seeing a whole race of Duckies, which...
The only thing it could be more similar to that movie is if one of those aliens saw the crew and went like, Monkey!
Definitely would be in character for Minister Odala to do that, that's for sure. The Doctor notes that the hadrosaur could turn into a more complex life form, as Janeway tells the computer to run an experiment. What would the hadrosaur look like after 65 million years? The hadrosaur instantly turns into a Voth, as to know that the alien is a dinosaur and, quote, why have we never seen him in a natural history museum? We then cut back to Gagan's research ship, as Chakotay suggested the Voth evolved on an isolated continent, and any evidence of their people on Earth must have been erased over time. Gagan notes that his people somehow must have developed spacecraft and left the planet to go to the Delta Quadrant. Gagan notes that is why he had to find the Voyager, as Chakotay sarcastically remarks, next time you might want to try a simple hello first. Gagan recognizes how he was prejudiced in that Voth think of mammals as a lower life form, but now that he has met Chakotay and others, he has a better impression of them, which I do like how they do that. They don't make Gagan out to be this completely flawless, 100% creature. Chakotay says they should go back to Voyager as, quote, your friend is probably sick of all the mammalian food right about now. Gagan says that he can't do that as he has to meet up with his supporters because he's being charged with heresy against the doctrine. Gagan notes that even the Ministry would be forced to acknowledge the truth if they see a human before them, and he can't let them leave just yet.
Yeah, I also like that as well. Like, he himself is not immune to some of the prejudice that he's kind of grown up with, but unlike Sunny Star Scout, he openly comes to acknowledge, upon getting to know an actual human, that he has all found them quite honestly comforting and quite impressionable. I am all for people like him getting to actually know people instead of just seeing them from a distance like he was initially doing.
We then cut to the science lab on Voyager, where Paris puts an apple on the cloaking device, much to Tuvok's bemusement. The Vulcan wanted a biocylinder instead. However, the apple disappears in the cloaking device as Tuvok notes it's pushing the apple out of phase with the space-time continuum, and how it's more advanced than any cloak he has ever seen before. The ship begins to shake as the Voth city ship from earlier appears and approaches Voyager. Voyager is put on red alert as the entire ship is beamed aboard the Voth city ship, which really shows just how overpowered these aliens are.
Yeah, it's definitely telling when a race sees the concept of bending light, ultimately making your body so metallic, invisible, and just says, I think we can one-up that. Yeah, these guys just 100% made Starfleet look like a bunch of chumps. Like, even the Vulcans are cocking their eyebrows in unison at this.
I warned you guys, nobody, and I meant nobody, expects the Vothian Inquisition.
After a fade to black, Janeway notes how they're losing power as all the systems shut down. Janeway tells all of the others to go to bridge as Tuvok and Paris note the power is out as well, before a chittering sound is heard. Paris jokes he hopes that's Tuvok's stomach, as Tuvok notes his tricorder isn't working, before he is hit by a dart from earlier. Paris stays to help Tuvok, but Tuvok tells him to just go before slumping down on the panel. We then cut to the bridge where Harry tells Janeway that the primary systems are locked, as Janeway says they can get to engineering to access the manual override, and I did not believe this. Dennis Nedry's system shutdown was really more powerful than he could have ever expected. It shut down an entire starship.
If only Janeway had access to a certain thick and certain gruff Triceraton general. It's a shame she's currently stuck in the past right now dealing with a bunch of mutants and a whole bunch of actual dinosaurs.
Instead of Dennis Nedry, a Vought then appears, as he tells the crew that the vessel is under their control. We cut back to Gagan's research ship as he gets a notification. The Vought have captured Voyager, and if Gagan is not to return to the city ship, they will kill everybody on board. He says that if he returns, they will discredit his theory, but Chakotay realizes that he is the living evidence and that he is on trial as well. We cut to the Voyager, where the Voth asks the crew where Gagan is. They then ask the Janeway where she comes from, as she demands they release her ship. The Voth replies by saying, "You have no rights under our doctrine," and asks her again where they come from. Janeway answers that we're from the same place you are, Earth, as the Voth disgustingly says that Gegan is already spreading his lies. We cut to engineering where a Voth is on patrol, only to see the monitor flashing. Paris then decloaks and knocks out the Voth, then calls Janeway to tell her that he has weapons control. Janeway smugglingly tells the Voth that it's her helmsman and he is going to blast a hole in the side of the Voth ship. Janeway tells Paris to fire, but it turns out nothing happens. The ship shakes, and the computer tells Paris that the weapon system is currently offline thanks to an unknown method. I really do like that little bit of subversion that, oh, you think that the Voyager is going to blast a hole in the Voth ship and escape, but no, they actually take it in a more realistic direction, which is really cool.
Yeah, you're dealing with an advanced race so advanced that they are able to de-power your entire ship while also teleporting it inside, and also has cloaking that can shift the literal space-time continuum. Oh, and as a little bonus, they also control literal T-Rexes and Raptors, and you expected to blow a hole in that ship of that species. Like, good try and all, but you're going up against dinosaur aliens.
The Voth are really just so overpowered in this episode, at least in terms of military firepower, that really makes what happens to the Voyager almost like they stood absolutely no chance against these aliens. Paris tells Janeway that his attempt failed, as the Voth tells his commander that Voyager's captain is not cooperating and to send an interrogation surgeon to get the information out of her. But he is told that Gegan is already found and on trial, which brings us some really creepy implications of the Voth Empire, and to quote Dr. Doofenshmirtz, if I had a nickel for every time a spacefaring alien lizard race were evil fascists, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird it happened twice. We cut to the ship where Odala arrives. Odala says that Gegan is accused of heresy, and is given an opportunity to recant his distant origin theory, but Gegan bravely does not. She smirks and decides to let the trial proceed as we fade to black. When we come back in, we see that Odala begins the trial by saying that Gegan circulated a study that disputed doctrine, only for Gegan to retort by saying he didn't even mention the doctrine in his study. Odala says how his meaning is clear and he used the distant origin theory to undermine everything about their society. The way this is all set up, with the Voth Empire being such an evil dictatorship, is so eerie in such a good way, and it's so sad this is so applicable to today in so many different ways. It's such a shame.
Basically, since the Voth captured Voyager, the way that the series, this episode has been shot, changed drastically. With the exception of the one action scene, they've all been extreme close-ups or slightly altered angles, but very much focusing on the faces. Because effectively this changed from an action episode or an exploration episode to one of those style of court case movies or character study movies. And they did this intentionally because they want you to see the reactions and just how much everything that's being said and done matters on such a minuscule level.
Exactly. This episode basically is just, let's do Inherit the Wind, but in outer space. And it actually works out way better than you think it would.
Her whole character pretty much boils down to, yeah, I don't like this. This is one of those things that must be heresy. I'll give it this. They do a lot more with it than just simply make her out to be the woman child that she ultimately is. It starts to break the more the trial goes on, as we'll no doubt see. In the beginning, she does her best to ultimately argue against it before just throwing all caution to the wind and just making her case blatantly clear to a very violent degree from the get-go. Like, nothing physically violent, but verbally violent.
Exactly. It's one of those things that it really just is a vibrant description of this environment and this civilization, which is done in such a good way. Again, I hate to keep comparing apples to oranges, but I compare something like this to a show like V, a show which literally was about evil alien dictatorships from outer space, and one episode of this show does the concept so much better than V. It's mind-blowing. Gegan says he is not concerned with the doctrine as Odala rises up, shouting how he is a destructive influence to their society. Odala tries to force him to apologize and disavow his claims, only for Gegan not to budge. Gegan says that the proof is standing right beside him, referring to Chakotay. Odala takes out a tablet and reads that their scientist analyzed his data and says that they concluded humans are not related to Voth in any way, which implies that the scientists may have made the same conclusion as Gegan, but were forced by the state to change it because it didn't follow under their law. And another thing to point out, this society is very much reminded me of Planet of the Apes, how they depicted the dictatorship in that, with Dr. Zaius and how they undermined the findings of Cornelius and Zira in a pretty interesting way. Chakotay tries to explain that in Voyager's database, they have a fossil record of Earth and how their genetic markers are in hundreds of species from Earth. Odala brushes him off, saying that Chakotay's interpretation is wrong and asks Gegan once again if he will recant his theory. Gegan still resists, saying he knows they are from Earth. Odala notes that others disagree as Veer is brought into the room. This is the part of the episode that really, to me, is the creepiest because as soon as he comes in, you can tell the Voth did something to Veer. We don't know what it is. We never find out. And in fact, there's a bit of continuation in a little bit. But you could really tell whatever this society did to this poor guy to get him to say what he's about to say, they really went the extra step to really brutalize and torture this guy.
Yeah, this was the moment where things definitely got rough for me. I am one of those people where I prefer other stuff like Transformers and Star Wars and whatnot over Star Trek. The lengths they go to hit a little too close to home for me personally. Nothing personal like that happened to me.
Odala asked Veer for his credentials, and after getting it, then asks him if he knows the distant origin theory. Veer says yes, as Odala asks him if he thinks it is a valid theory. However, Veer says no, as Gegan yells in shock at this. Veer sadly and quietly admits that they saw an evolutionary connection when in fact there is none, as Odala thanks him, then ushers him out of the room. Gegan is horrified at this, as he continuously asks Odala how they got Veer to change his mind, noting that they probably either threatened to torture him or torture his family. Odala then screams at him to answer, as Gegan yells that the court has already made up their mind and will do anything to silence him, as he says he will not recant no matter what. He says that he would rather go to a prison colony before submitting to them, but I don't know if that's such a bad deal, Gegan, because as we all know from Blade Runner, you can really live a good life in the off-world colonies. Odala notes that your true scales are showing, as Gegan says he was mistaken about the ministers, as he says he thought Odala would have listened to the truth.
This is a gal who basically is threatening you verbally to send you to the prison colonies and has gone out of her way to ensure that everything you stand for and everything that will confirm this sort of thing is false. Like, how do you expect reason from someone like this? I ask you.
Exactly, and they do something a little bit later on in the episode that really is so daring for Star Trek that you haven't really seen before, and it is really impressive. Odala manages to cut off Gegan, screaming at him how, "We are not immigrants." She shouts how, "I will not deny 20 million years of history and doctrine just because one insignificant little saurian has a theory." She again yells at Gegan to recant his theory, as Chakotay then approaches Odala, saying how he would like to speak. Chakotay then says that Odala is guilty of the same thing as Gegan, and brings up how her beliefs are what's really on trial. I do like how Odala is just so shocked at this. The way she just says, "What?" Like how she never even considered that before anybody told her before. It's really impressive and builds up to a pretty good moment. Chakotay notes that he learned a lot about Voth culture, and in particular, trans-warp and space travel was a great achievement for them, but the doctrine says that it would only lead to misery and woe. Chakotay continues to say that the doctrine was changed, and how they can make other changes. Change can be difficult, but when ideas are accepted, progress is truly made.
The writers and producers of the series have said many times they loved giving Chakotay these long monologues where he just talked and basically nothing else happened, because the actor was a master of just pulling you in and keeping you enticed with what he had to say and how he was saying it.
I will say this. He is as good as Patrick Stewart is with some of his speeches. It really is just so impressive. However, Odala says that the distant origin theory truly disgusts her. The very idea of them, quote, fleeing from another wretched planet, the Voth, a group of pathetic refugees with no truth birthright, that she could not allow that. Chakotay tells her that he sees it differently, that the Voth actually managed to thrive and boldly managed to go into outer space to find their calling, and kept going with courage. He notes that they ended up creating a culture, and if they were to deny the past, they deny both their true heritage and the work of all their ancestors. Odala walks back to her throne, and I do like this. In a traditional Star Trek episode, Odala would at least consider changing her mind, or would at the very least concede that perhaps this trial was a misjudgment and would do it to a later date. But Voyager, on the other hand, does something totally different, because she just walks back to her throne and sits down before asking Gegan if he retracts his claims yet again. The scientist still says he stands by it, and I just really like this moment, how Odala learned absolutely nothing. As I mentioned, traditionally in Star Trek, the big ending speech would cause her to at least have an inkling of a reconsideration of her ideas, but in this episode, no. She's just too far gone. She's too stuck in her ways. Nothing, no amount of speeches from any crew member will get her to change her mind. And I like that because it's realistic. This is what would probably really happen in life in some places. And it's so well done for that reason. Gegan is sentenced to the crime of heresy and is sentenced to hard labor in a prison camp. However, Odala then sentences Chakotay and the rest of the Voyager crew to the same fate, horrifying Gegan. She says that the Voyager ship will also be completely destroyed, as Gegan is shocked, begging to let the Voyager crew go.
The venom has officially been spewed. Are we sure she's still not related to Dilophosaurus in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, this right here is just so dark, because not only is she just going to make him go to hard labor in prison, she's going to do a group of, let's face it, completely innocent bystanders who had really nothing to do with the events of the entire episode, just in order to kick Gegan while he's down. And man, I'm going to say this right now. I think Odala might be in the top 10 most evil Star Trek villains just for that alone. And the little smirk she lets off when she sees him begging for their lives. Odala smirks at him evilly and says how, "Are you offering me an alternative?" And this is the moment where I really was reminded of Kai Wynn from Deep Space Nine, because this is exactly something she would do. It makes me wonder that if they didn't kill her off in Deep Space Nine, spoilers for a 20-year-old TV series, if they would have had her be kind of the main villain of this, because it's so similar to that in a way, but they do their own twist on it, which I like. Gegan is now forced to recant his theories publicly, as he does so tearfully, knowing how he doesn't believe anything of it. He still believes in the distant origin theory, but for the lives of those on Voyager, he has to submit to the wills of the Ministry for their own goodwill. And man, this is just such a heart-wrenching moment, because he does, of course, what Spock once said, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. It basically is the same thing.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. This right here was what made the overall episode up to this point a little hard to sit through. Which, yeah, props for doing a A-tier job of making us dislike this character a lot and ultimately making us relate more to the Voyager and Gegan. But I think you did too good a job, because it's no surprise that the moment she did that ultimately lost me. Like, I get where she's coming from. I get where they're coming from. Everyone has a point in this. But to quote a line from Josh Scorcher, intentionally bad is still bad. Bad to the bone doesn't even begin to describe it for even a second.
Odala, just to put salt in the wound, then forces him to retire from being an archaeologist, reassigning him to a job of metallurgical analysis, which, again, just is how creepy how the Voth state can order you to do a different job when they find you guilty. It really sinks into how creepy this society is. Odala then turns to Chakotay and says that I am not unreasonable and that he will be returned to Voyager where they will leave immediately. She then hisses how it will be in your best interest if I never saw you again with an evil expression. And sadly, she gets her way because as far as I know, the Voth have never appeared on Star Trek again since this episode. And it really is so sad because it's one of those things that they had so much potential on that, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know, it's one of those things where it really could have been interesting to see them go to the Voth culture and see a bit more of it, but at the same time, I understand the story they were trying to tell.
Thankfully, however, while we don't exactly see them in the main TV series or any of the movies, we get a little bit of a chance to show them their place in Star Trek Online, where we get a little bit more of their culture, how they ultimately operate, the whole Velociraptor and dinosaurs. While they weren't exactly forgotten, yeah, we at least get to show them the error of their ways in video game form. So take that, you frickin' fascists.
We then cut to Voyager alongside Gagan's ship as Gagan weeps over what is happening with himself, saying how his new career will be completely undistinguished. He notes how foolish he was to try such a thing, to risk everything, as Chakotay tells him that he was just as brave as his ancestors to try and take another step. Gagan says how Chakotay has been a very good friend as Chakotay gives Gagan a gift, a small globe of the Earth, as Gagan touches it in wonder. Gagan says that maybe one day all of Voth will recognize Earth as their homeland and to keep their eyes open. The episode ends with Chakotay beaming down to the Voyager as Gagan just touches the globe in wonder as a tear falls in his eye, which, again, this might be one of the biggest downers of Star Trek in general.
In case the Galileo comparisons weren't quite hitting home with that fucking Inquisition trial, here, have a round globe to cap it off.
Yep, Star Trek is nothing if not subtle.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Like, I get how this still feels a little bit like a knife to the gut, but this gives us a silver lining that even though this might be the last time the Federation or anyone interacts with the Voth to try and openly or ultimately challenge their minds, we at least get a silver lining in the form of at least one soul ultimately being able to influence people in subtle and silent ways without ultimately doing what they do best while working in their field. It's one of the things that's still a little sad, but it gives me hope that not everything is going to turn out as shitty going forward for the Voth, or for anyone in the Star Trek universe related to the Voth.
Even though the Voth wouldn't show up on Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Voyager itself would continue until 2001 when it would have its finale. However, this would not be the end of the characters, as Janeway, Chakotay, and the Doctor would later appear in Star Trek Prodigy, which is pretty much the Star Wars Clone Wars of Star Trek. And that it's an animated CGI spin-off that is actually pretty good from what I've heard, and hopefully we can find a reason to talk about it in the future because it looks pretty good. Unfortunately, there's also a preschool spin-off of Star Trek that I very much hope we do not have to talk about because it looks terrible. Young Jedi Adventures was bad. This Star Trek spin-off looks at least 50 times worse. Like, I have no idea what they were thinking with this.
Prodigy is currently canceled. So basically, they canceled that series in favor for this one. Congratulations, Paramount. You're definitely winning that WWE lawsuit soon.
Such a shame because, again, it really looked pretty good. But this kind of leads directly to the question of the week, which is, what is your favorite piece of Star Trek media? I'll go first, and this one was a tough one because I actually always liked Star Trek a little bit better than Star Wars, in my opinion, and I really had to think about this because I like Deep Space Nine, don't get me wrong, Deep Space Nine is great, but for me, it really came down to original series versus Next Generation. Yes, I am still one of those guys, don't at me. After really, really considering it, I had to give the edge just by a tiny hair, by a Lightning McQueen tongue to Next Generation, because I'm sorry, the way that took the original Star Trek and did everything it did, but it took the next step. Like, Star Trek original series is groundbreaking, and it, compared to 9/10 of science fiction on TV back then, is absolutely amazing. Like, you were not going to see the type of topics talked about on Lost in Space, for example. But Next Generation took everything that original series did, and it really took the next step. It introduced such great characters of the franchise: Picard, Data, Geordi LaForge, Troy, Q. Like, so many iconic characters. Worf, it was so popular, he even got to be on another Star Trek show afterwards. It really is just something that is so well done. The effects for 1988 are really impressive stuff. It has held up shockingly well. And is every episode perfect of Next Generation? Of course not. No episode of any television is absolutely perfect. But at the same time, it has so many good moments. I mean, has there ever been an episode of television more exciting than the two-parter where we got to see that Picard was made part of the Borg? Has there ever been a cliffhanger that is that shocking? I don't think so. 40 years on, I don't think so. It is one of those shows that has held up really good, and I have not seen Picard, so I cannot say about that, but all I can say about it is I really hope they didn't try to screw up with Next Generation too much, because that would just make me really sad. But I'm not knocking original series either. Original series is a groundbreaking. It still holds up pretty good today. There are a few goofy effects, like the alien creature that is literally just a dog with a plastic horn taped on it, or the weird-looking puppet aliens in the one episode, but at the same time, it really holds up so well. And animated series is pretty good too. I will say that. That probably was the best thing Filmation ever did. Not so much animation quality-wise, but story-wise, easily. But yeah, I've rambled a little bit enough, so that's definitely going to be my pick. It's going to be Next Generation. Let's see. Angron, what would your pick be for your favorite Star Trek series?
Now, as much as I'm not as big a fan of Star Trek like most people are, even I gotta admit that when Star Trek decides to take jabs at itself, they sometimes work pretty well. And nowhere is that more prevalent and honestly the best than with Star Trek Lower Decks. A lot of people ultimately love to mock the shit out of Star Trek. That's honestly not really a lie. And for the most part, it's all fun and games until someone shares a mean-ass comment on Twitter. Yada yada. But thankfully, Lower Decks here takes that concept and just decides to roll with it, and also tells an interesting little story. This right here was honestly a time capsule of opening up Star Trek and just seeing all the gaffes and stuff, all the weird stuff, all the things that people love to mock about Star Trek, and it was hilarious. Yeah, when it took itself seriously, it kind of dampened the thing a little bit when it wasn't executed well, but when it was, I was for it. Like, it tells the story of Rutherford, Ensign Mariner, Boimler, and Tendi, and it ultimately gives a more human and, again, comical side to Star Trek that just is executed very well. Like, it's funny, it's got some pretty interesting humor, to say the least. It references so much of Star Trek in ways that I was honestly surprised to learn about, and tackle stuff in angles that I would have never honestly expected Star Trek to do, and yet they do it. In fact, hell, in Strange New Worlds, the series did a collab with Lower Decks. They had the live-action people who voiced the people from Lower Decks and everything, which, amazing. Not much left to say about it. It's a fun, entertaining experience. It was just amazing. They reference even the Star Trek series with one of the characters, even though she is a very different character than the one in that series. Yeah, that's going to be my pick, Star Trek Lower Deck.
That is a great choice right there because, again, Lower Decks actually took a more comedic look at Star Trek, but it wasn't insulting. I do have to give them credit. It wasn't insulting to Star Trek as a whole. It was like, yes, let's point out some of the comedic possibilities of Trek, but it wasn't a deconstructed parody or anything like that, which I'm always glad to see. Let's see, Matt, what would your pick be?
I'm going for a very weird choice here. I'm actually going Voyager itself. I'm not saying Voyager is the best Star Trek series, by far. Of all the original series or pre-Kelvin verse series, however you want to phrase that, it's probably actually the worst. This is what got me into Star Trek. I was a kid and watched this in real time as it was progressing. I started from episode 1 and watched all the way to the finale week by week. So this kind of holds a special place in my heart because it is what originally got me to watch everything else. If it weren't for Voyager, I would never have seen original series, Next Gen, DS9, all of these fantastic shows. So it's more the idea of this was my stepping stone into it. Not to say that there aren't good things about Voyager. I love every two-parter in Voyager. I love when Voyager actually lived up to its premise of being a darker Star Trek. I love when they actually focused on the core concept and less the goofy shit that it unfortunately quite often devolved into. It could be a good series on its own when it actually bothered to be, but it being the reason that I became such a huge Trek fan will always hold a special place in my heart.
I could easily see why, because every single time you watch a show for the first time and it gets you into a whole property, that will always be your favorite no matter what. And Voyager is one of those shows that really, it's a shame it's such a mixed bag because, as you said, it really did have such potential and it lived up to it more often than not. So, let's see. Shark, what would your pick be?
I never actually watched Star Trek. Or at least not too deep. Like, I think I mentioned it before. I was never really into science fiction at the early stages of my life. So, didn't really get into it. But I am aware of its cult, of the whole thing. Like, everybody will talk about it. And good Lord, every single show will parody it. And yeah, for this question, I think I'm just going to grab an episode from a show that made their own take on Star Trek, and that's going to be the Star Trek Unconventional from Dexter's Laboratory.
That was a classic.
So in this episode, Dexter and two friends go to a convention for, well, what do you think? But they get mixed up and they end up in what's basically a Barbie section of the convention, and they treat it like they're lost in on a completely different planet. Like, they see the fans and it's like, oh, these species are so primitive. They treat their these figures as their goddesses, and they ring tribute. It has all the beats. The opening actually has like the song in the car. It's eventually revealed it's actually Dexter's mom who is singing. When they open a toy that, you know, they're not supposed to open them, the NRFB, they chant, and they actually have Dexter having to fight one of the shopkeepers in a parody of the famous fight scenes the show has and all of that. So yeah, it's a fun episode, and not really into Star Trek, but I did enjoy it. I did enjoy that one.
Yeah, that was a great episode because you could really tell the Dexter's Lab crew had such a fondness of Star Trek. Well, Tartakovsky obviously was a fan, and you could really tell because the way they replicate so many elements of Star Trek in that episode really is a fun time.
Yep.
Now it is time for the patent-pending Dragoness Scale, where we are going to rank Minister Odala. I'll go first, and this is going to be an interesting one because I feel like I have to give Minister Odala a higher score than I gave the aliens from V. And that is because, number one, let's face it, it's a much better costume than the ones from V, the aliens. But number two is she's so much better written than them. Not to keep comparing apples and oranges, it's just something that is interesting to point out. But getting back to her, I'm giving Minister Odala an 8 out of 10. The appearance of the aliens, honestly, is not my favorite. I would have had him be a bit more lizard-like in terms of face and that, but that's not the point. The point and why I'm giving her the 8 out of 10 is her character. This actress is doing the hell out of this part. You really feel every single bit of tortured justification that Odala does. Every single evil deed that she does to try to keep her doctrine under wraps. And not to mention, for most of the episode, she's in this stoic, no-nonsense antagonist figure. When we do see the wall finally crack and we just see her hatred and just disgust at the thought of being related to a mammalian species and not being the master race of outer space, it is so creepy when we actually get to see that no, it's not that she's just religiously brainwashed by the system. She really is just that prejudiced and that evil. That is a look into a psyche that, for granted, one character who maybe has 10 minutes of screen time in one episode of a 7-season TV series, it is just so amazing if she's just that memorable from that little screen time. The actress is doing the hell out of it, and not so much her aesthetics in this case, but just in terms of the character. I cannot give her anything less than an 8 out of 10. I would go a little higher, but I feel like if she was in a little more of the episode, like we got to see her interaction with other Voyager characters, like with Janeway or with Paris and that. But with that being said, we still see so much of her that is so well done. It is amazing. Let's see, Angron, what would you give her?
I'm gonna have to go a little lower. Like, everything you said about her definitely applies. You may think that she's like brainwashed by the system that she and her people have ultimately made, but she is the system. Like, she hides nothing about her intentions. It definitely works for a series like this. It definitely gets across just how effective she is as a manipulator and as an authoritative power. Sad to say, though, like I said, they did too good a job with her. She was just a punch in the gut that I couldn't really stomach all that much. Like, it wasn't bad, don't get me wrong, and she's not getting an even lower score than I initially thought because of it. Yeah, I didn't like this character. Validly so, but wow, she was just not great. She was just way too effective at her job, and I kind of fucking hate her guts for it. She works, but it's because she works that ultimately I'm going to have to give her a 6 out of 10. Yeah, she's not bad. She does her job effectively well. She is quite bad, but intentionally bad is still bad. That bad. She's not a bad character. She works. She's effective. She makes the story come together nicely with a neat little bow made of venom. But yeah, she's not my cup of tea. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a 7.
Let's see, Matt, what would you give her?
First, the design actually I do like. It not only looks alien, but it also does look like something that would have come from Earth. So there is an intent to this design. I appreciate that. The way that they have done the full body outfits actually does look good. And that's one thing that Trek was always good about. They were good, even in the old days, at making costumes that looked, if nothing else, fun, if not really good and convincing. As far as the character is concerned, Blood compared her to Kai Wynn, and I do not disagree with that. I've actually compared her to the Borg Queen or Gul Dukat for how intimidating and how just fear-inspiring a presence she is. This is a one-off, one-episode character, and I have put her into the highest vaults of Star Trek villains that are usually only reserved for the series-long recurring ones. The actress played such a good character with this. She knew to give a subtle performance and yet put every shred of raw, toxic emotion and vitriol that she could in this character. It really does amaze that Conchita Tomei is effectively just a bit actress, and she's never really done any major thing because she is so good at what she does here alone as Minister Odala. I love this character. This is one of my favorite episodes of not just Voyager but Trek, and it is because of her and how good of a character she is to just despise. I give her a 10.
Wow, I was definitely not expecting that, and I agree wholeheartedly with everything you said. For a one-off character to stack up to those other types of characters, it really is just so impressive. I really have to give them all the credit in the world for that. So let's see, Shark, what would you give him?
For a one-off character, yeah, there's a lot of memorable stuff with her. The design is great, I really like it, but, scaling a lot. I kind of wish it was a bit more lizard-like, but I can get it past that. But okay, that's fine, design's fine. What I really like is, the character, like Mathmachine, she's so toxic, she's full of hate, and as you also pointed out earlier, is that in this type of episodes where the whole thing is, don't judge people or don't be prejudiced and all of that. You say, oh well, the lesson at the end of the episode is gonna be that she's going to learn her mistakes, or at least her people are gonna learn something. And it's like, no, they're not. They're still gonna believe they're superior. They're still gonna hate your gods, and yeah, that's honestly very subversive and really surprising that they went that route. But I also have to kind of agree with Angron. There may be some bits where it feels like a little too much. I can see why, but I could have toned it down a bit there. But right. It's not perfect, but she's gonna get a high score, especially because, again, a one-off character with this so much personality and influence is great. She's gonna be an 8 out of 10.
Okay, I can definitely see why. And yeah, pretty high overall. Like I say, did pretty good. I think better than actually the Star Wars characters. So currently Trek is winning on that front. And we'll see if we have any moment that we could talk about Star Trek again, because yeah, this was a lot of fun. And hopefully we'll talk more about this show. If you have any questions, or if you want to suggest other Star Trek episodes we could talk about, you can feel free to email us at fiorydiscourse@outlook.com. Visit us at twitter.com/fiorydiscourse. Visit us at Bluesky Fiery Discourse. Be sure to subscribe to the Fiery Discourse YouTube channel and subscribe to the playlist. Like and hit the bell icon. Leave a comment. Any all comments are appreciated. Next week, we are going from Star Trek to a more Eastern science fiction franchise, because we're going to be talking about the 1999 Godzilla the Series episode, End of the Line, where this is the second time we talk about a female Godzilla-like creature on the podcast, but will she do as good as Godzirin from all the way back of Godzilla Land? We will have to see. That'll be it for this week, and until then, thank you all so much for listening, and take care.
Later, y'all.
Peace out.
Adios. See you all next week.